Hello, everybody, and welcome to Be a Better Game Master, another podcast episode. If this is your first time tuning in to my YouTube channel, and you're more interested in streamlined, edited, fun, quick advice on being a better game master, this might not be for you. You might want to check out one of the videos I have. This podcast is something that I do, and you know this if you've listened to other podcast episodes on this channel. It's something that I do when I'm feeling like I want to talk about something, but I don't really want to make a video, or I don't feel like I don't feel like the stream, my thoughts in this stream of consciousness type of format is good enough for a video. So, otherwise, if this is something that you're interested in, maybe you're driving in your car or cleaning your house or whatnot, and you don't mind hearing my dogs in the background or my cat meowing at me, or other home sounds, I'm sure I'll burp or something sometime in here. Oh, geez. Then maybe this is for you if you're interested in that sort of thing. But basically, I usually hit this handheld recorder whenever I'm feeling like I want to talk about something, but I don't really know what it is. And today, I feel like I hate this episode already. And the reason is because I feel like the thing that I do want to talk about that's in my mind is something that if I were cruising YouTube and I saw someone make a video or a podcast about this subject, I don't think I would be interested. I think I would skip over this one. But I feel like it's good for me to talk about it because not only because a lot of people have asked me about it, but because it helps me keep it in my head, like remember the things that, I don't know, that kept me in this hobby, that got me into this hobby. And so, yeah, that's kind of the subject is I want to talk about why I game and where it started. And I don't know, if you get something out of this, awesome. Otherwise, no worries. I won't hold it against you if you skip over this episode, but I feel like a lot of the creativity in my head stems from my roots in gaming. And I just noticed my battery on this handheld device is running low, so there might be a break in the audio at some point, but that's fine. That's the whole point of this. Either way, no matter what happens in this episode, I want you to post in the comments, like the first moment you became a gamer. Whether that happened around the table with your parents introducing you to the game, or a friend, or if it happened at school. I know a lot of people, played, Dungeons and Dragons, for example, in the, school cafeterias. That's actually not something I ever did. I was probably 13. This was, I'm about almost 30 now. So this was about 17 years ago. And I know this, this is going to sound strange, but I was 13 when I saw the 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons Player's Handbook on the wall at my local comic book store. God, I already want to stop this podcast because I'm like, this is so boring. Who'd want to know this stuff? But I'm not going to, because that's my unwritten rule. You'll, I'll leave it to you if you want to skip over it. But I saw this book, and I didn't even know what role-playing was, okay? I'm serious. Like, I didn't know what Dungeons and Dragons was. I'm trying to describe this feeling I had in my head when I saw the book. But the only words I can use to describe it is that I knew it's what I wanted. I knew it's what I needed in my life when I saw it. And just looking at it, I kind of knew it had something to do with playing pretend. And that was such a huge part of my childhood. Still is, even in my adult life, even outside of tabletop gaming. I played pretend so much as a kid. Like, that was my favorite thing. And there were times where we had trampolines in our backyard, and I would throw on headphones and I would jump on the trampoline and just imagine I don't know, scenarios that I was in where I would triumph. And these exercises in creativity I knew somehow were inside of this book. And, maybe it's unfair to say I didn't know what role-playing was, because at the time I sort of knew already. I knew, so that was kind of a blatant lie. But I don't remember ever thinking, oh, it's a role-playing book when I picked up the book, because it was earlier, actually, when I was in 8th grade, before high school, when I encountered my first role-playing game, which was Werewolf the Apocalypse. And we never played the game, but we made characters. And I remember I was kind of obsessed with Swedish, the Swedish language and just Sweden in general at the time. And we had a Swedish foreign exchange student. And I just thought it was so cool. So, I made my werewolf Swedish, and he had a Swedish name. And we never played, ever. I was never introduced to the mechanics, but I named him. I think I filled out a character sheet, but I knew at that moment, I was like, oh, this is rad. This is so dope. I am going to be doing this, like, forever. Fast forward now to when I find that 3rd edition Player's Handbook. And I opened it up, and I remember seeing Lita the Rogue. You remember when D&D, I don't know if they still do this, actually. I probably should know, but because I have the Player's Handbook for 5th edition now, and I've looked into it a lot. But I remember when they used to name their characters, right? Lita the Rogue. I can't remember any of the other names, but I just thought it was so cool. I was like, oh my gosh, she's a half-elf. I want to play a half-elf. I love the idea of the ostracized figure in role-playing games. And, the person that's not accepted by anybody. Maybe that's cliche or emo of me, but that's part of my younger life. I didn't have parents that played role-playing games. I still don't. In fact, my mother knows what I'm doing with this channel, and she knows that, a lot of people are interested, and she knows about Absolute Tabletop, the company I'm now a part of with Matt, Tim, and James from A Fistful of Dice and Tabletop Terrors, respectively. And, whenever I say, oh, I'm going to game, she still gives me that look like, oh, you're still doing that sort of thing. And that's kind of the environment I grew up in. I was never a star at anything. I was always kind of second best at everything. Kind of a bard, a jack of all trades. And so I liked the idea of playing that person, that ostracized character, the person that has two sides of them. The side that is orderly and, conservative and, raised by a Marine dad, and the side that, on the opposite, that is creative and excited about pretending and imagining. And, after a while, you kind of lose track of which part is you and which part is your outlet. And I love the idea of playing with that. I'm a big fan of playing characters that represent some sort of real part of me. In the Provokers game that a lot of people have watched. If you haven't, I recommend it just because I love Matt's GMing and I feel like we tell a really cool story. But my character, Dice, is absolutely based on real life experiences. And it makes it, people say, well, if you've never heard this advice, then I'll say it. I say, run what you know or play what you know. For example, if you live in, the Pacific Northwest, then you're familiar with how dense a forest can actually be. And that will affect your games. If you're running a game, it won't be like, well, we're traveling through the forest. No. You're fighting your way through the forest because this forest is so dense. If you live in the desert, you know what it's like to be hot, sweaty, and a mile from home without any water, and you're just so thirsty and you can't wait to get to your home so you can just drink straight from the hose, and that's, both of those scenarios are part of my life. both of those locations in the United States. And so, running what you know is you'll run a game in those two locations. For example, if you're from this desert area, you'll run a game that's so realistic because you know it. You've experienced it. Same goes when you're playing a character. If you have experienced loss in your life and you can find some way to put that in your game in a way that's, maybe not exactly like the thing you experienced, but more of a, what's the word I'm looking for? More of a parallel, something you can relate to, but something that's a little bit different, so it still leaves room for exploration. You're going to kill it. You're going to have a blast. And that's the point. And I feel like that's what made playing dice so fun for me. And so much of a life experience. I feel like that ultimately is why I game. It's not for this escape. A lot of people say, well, I game, to escape reality. And I understand that, right? You get home from a job, working 9 to 5, maybe 8 to 5, oftentimes, sitting in front of a screen all day, and it's just like, I just want to play. I just want to play. For me, I'm lucky enough to be able to work from home, and I'm lucky enough to, have a creative outlet in my life to where if I'm feeling creative, I can be creative. If I'm feeling structured, I can, do something structured. These are bad examples, but I feel like the reason I play is to explore. And maybe even subconsciously. I like to explore who I am. Because I'm still in that same boat I was in when I was a kid. There's a part of me that's organized and structured, and, I'm a business owner, and I like to have a rhythm and a rhyme to everything. It's very interesting me saying that because 2 years ago I'd be like, that. No, you're never going to be like that. It's just something that happened in my brain quite recently. Once I started getting healthy and making some changes in my life. But there's also this part of me that's super creative and oftentimes I don't want to make this get emo or sappy or whatever, but sad, especially when it comes to things like politics or things like just tragedies in reality when it comes to just things I've experienced in my life, which, don't get me wrong, is a cakewalk when compared to many, many other lives. So, I'm not saying that I've had it so hard. I've not. I haven't. But I do know what it's like to kind of feel down, and my outlet for that is my music. And what I meant is I'm still in that same boat where I'm not sure which is me, the fun, energetic, happy video making Barker that loves to edit and just have a blast, energy, fun, or the part of me that would rather get in a recording studio and record a song that's not happy, because, believe it or not, I've never recorded a happy song in my entire life. I can't do it. At least I can't do it well. But I'm not sure which is me and which is my outlet. And so we'll assume that gaming is my outlet. Let's just assume that. Or maybe they're both me. I don't know. I don't want to get into a philosophical thing. Although, if you're still listening to this right now, you probably wouldn't care. But exploration, I feel like, is why I game. I want to explore worlds. I want to create a scenario that puts characters, players, through something that I am interested in seeing the outcome of. I want to, whether that thing is fun, maybe I'm exploring something fun, or maybe I'm exploring something creepy, or scary, or sad, or just tragic. I want to see how the players react. And same thing when I'm a player. I want to see how I react. I want to see how the GM reacts when I put forth an idea that maybe perhaps they didn't see coming. And so I remember to bring it back, I remember when I saw Lyda the Rogue and I saw that the half-elf and what made a half-elf a true half-elf. I remember that separation from society, right? The elves hate him because they're part human, and the humans hate him because they're part elf. And, I wanted to explore that. And then I realized my buddy, Mike, my name is also Michael, by the way, but Barker's my last name, and I've gone by Barker for probably almost my entire life in some way, shape, or form. But my buddy Mike told me, yeah, my parents play D&D. And this was after I got that 3rd edition, and we started playing, and I started playing with his family, and that was a blast, and I really enjoyed the I could do anything aspect of playing. But what I really wanted to do was take these concepts and put them into action. I wanted to create worlds. I wanted to create these scenarios. And I think Saving Private Ryan had just come out, and my grandfather, for a little bit of family history, he served in the Pacific Theater of World War II. Same with all of my uncles on my dad's side, just pretty much everybody. I say uncles, I mean grand uncles. And so I knew a lot about the Pacific Theater. I didn't know too much about Europe. I mean, I knew the timeline of how things changed over there, but when it came to the Pacific Theater, I knew very specific names of islands like Guadalcanal or Okinawa or Iwo Jima, the one that everyone knows, or Tarawa, stuff like that. And I wanted to put my friend Mike, I wanted to give him a rifle, right? In this case would be, I think, an M1 Garand. My history's a little rough now. And I wanted to put him on those islands, see how he acted, see him fight in these combats. And I was just a terrible game master. I was so bad. I mean, mass combat is what brought me into the game. I love mass combat, right? But I was the type of game master that loved it so much but didn't know how to implement it. So I'd put 50 enemies on the other side, and I'd make my players shoot them all. And about halfway through, it would just get boring, and then we'd kind of just stop, and I'd go on to something else. And now I feel like I have a better grasp at it, but at the time, everybody has been a bad game master. The trick is realizing it and changing yourself. So often, a lot of people, this podcast is going all over the place. So often people will say, what's wrong with my game? I just can't get my players to take it seriously, or I can't get my players to, play the type of game I want to play. And so often the change doesn't happen with the players, but so often it needs to happen with the game master themselves. And I'll tell you right now, I've told a lot of people, on my YouTube channel and in the RPG community as a whole on Facebook, that I used to be a terrible game master. And I still think right now that there are things that I need to improve on. I'm working on improving during this Winds of Cerceline game that I'm running now. But I'm going to tell you the PTSD moment of my life. Not to, I say PTSD. I obviously do not mean PTSD, but it's the thing that happened when I was a game master that really showed me that my wake-up moment that, oh man, I really got to change the way I do things. And partially to blame is 4th edition D&D, but at the same time, I don't want to be like, hey, let's jump on the 4th edition hate bandwagon, because one of the best campaigns I've ever run, maybe the best campaign I've ever run, was run with 4th edition books on the table. This thing that happened was my fault, 99%. 4th edition D&D, if you're not aware, was very similar to a massive multiplayer online role-playing game, where, kind of like World of Warcraft, and they weren't even shy about marketing that. They said, hey, you play World of Warcraft, you'll love D&D 4th edition. Every character had abilities that kind of worked like a World of Warcraft ability, where, you can cast this once per encounter. You can cast this once per turn. And you have these, like this ability is just swinging an axe at an enemy, but it's given a cool name like Swift Blow, something like that. And they have printable cards that you print out that have your character's abilities on them. So a lot of people would play their game with these ability cards in front of them. And we had a player named Corey. Great guy. Great, creative, awesome dude. And I remember specifically there was a fight in a forest. I can't really remember what they were fighting, but I like the idea that there was jungle everywhere and they were having to, there were vines and stuff. And this is his first session, Corey's first session of a role-playing game ever. And he had the creative fire in his eyes. And I asked him, I got to him in the initiative order, and I said, hey, what do you do against these enemies? And he just got so excited. He said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take my rapier out, or his sword or his bow. I can't remember what weapon he had. And I'm going to cut a vine, and I'm going to swing down and land on top of one of the enemies. And once I land on top of him, I'm going to strike my sword downward and stab him into the ground. And I'm like, that's such a cool thing. What card do you play? What action do you take? See the problem there? And he looked down, he said, oh, action card? And he looked down at his cards, he said, oh, yeah, well, I think this one would be good. And he put it forward, and I said, all right, cool. Roll. And he rolled, and he succeeded, and he pinned the guy to the ground with his sword, and God, it was so cool. And the next turn, I asked him, okay, what do you do, Corey? And he said, I'm going to do this action again. And he played his card. And I just realized at that moment, that creative fire was gone. To him, this was a role-playing game, playing cards. And I was just thinking, oh man, what a waste. What a bummer. What have I done? And that's why I think, especially when you're running a game for new players, put the dice aside. Really show them what the point is. And I again, a lot of people will blame 4th edition for this, but after that moment, I really didn't. I put more emphasis on the story. I didn't take away the power cards or anything like that, but I put so much emphasis on the story that the power cards were just kind of a sidebar to what was happening. Ooh, it's a combat encounter. All right, well, we'll play little cards a little bit, but the rest of it is going to be story driven, and even the combat encounters are story driven. But that moment for me with Corey was like a wake up moment. It was like what are you doing? Come on, this isn't fun. And even if it's fun, this isn't what you're looking for. This isn't why you play role-playing games. And so I try very hard now to put the mechanics of the game as secondary to the story. And, a lot of people out there will throw a tomato at me for saying that. Not necessarily. I don't give you enough credit. A lot of people are very interested in the rules of the game. And I don't think that's a bad thing. To be interested in that. Excuse me, just doing some household cleanup while I'm podcasting. I don't think it's a bad thing to be interested in rules because, a lot of people, that's how they decide what game is fun for them. What game system, what mechanics help them to run the game they want or help them to explore like I want to or escape like a lot of people, play role-playing games to do. And so rules are important. I get that. And I think that a lot of groups have fun, a lot of fun playing very strictly to the rules, almost like a chainmail, first edition D&D type of board game, war game almost, which might not be giving it enough credit, as opposed to, more theater of the mind, end quote, type of imagine it, forget the dice, put them aside, But that's the thing that drives me. I enjoy the telling of stories. And I've not at all perfected that. But, I think that's why I play games. I feel like, you've waited 25 minutes watching me just sift through memories. And that's the point that I think I'm getting to. Is that's why I play games, because I love stories. From when I was a kid playing pretend, jumping on the trampoline, imagining stories, pretending that I was, in a situation where I would triumph, and that to me is why I play games. It's to create an adventure. And that's just an ancient primitive, prehistoric type of thinking for a human being is to tell a story. And what story are you going to tell? If you're in it to escape or if you're in it to explore, either way, you're telling this story. And my advice would be to make the story count. Make the story matter, because as I've just kind of realized, it's just something that seems to be ingrained in our heads. Tales, fiction, or exaggerated nonfiction, right? And so it's got to be existent in the players' heads too. And you can tell a great story while using very firm mechanics, How do you do that? You give one of the enemies a name. That's an example. You've already created a story, because now this orc who's named, Susie, terrible name, sorry. But now the players know, oh man, when I kill this orc, she's going to have a story. And maybe she has a letter in her pocket from her, designated matey from the tribe, and now, she's, after the players kill her, she's dead. That's story. You can follow the mechanics while still introducing that level of storytelling. And I think ultimately, for me at least, the story matters more than anything. Because without story, without telling tales, without pretending that certain things exist or certain things are happening, I don't know who I am. I can't imagine who that person is. And it's just such an integral part of my life that I want you to experience it. And I want you to try this. I want you to do something I just briefly mentioned earlier in this episode. I want you to play one game, maybe only 2 to 3 hours long. And I want you to put aside the dice. I don't want you to make one die roll. Instead, what I want you to do is run a narrative game. Now, this might be terrible, but you should still do it to see how you feel about it. Because on one hand of the spectrum is ultimate rules, ultimate mechanics, and a lot of people play on that side, or at least have played on that side. Not a lot of people have played on the other side of the spectrum, which is no mechanics, all sitting around the table. Oh, you want to attack the orc? Okay, tell me what happens. Do you succeed? Do you fail? Do you kill the orc? Do you just wound the orc? Do you, how do you hit the orc? Where do you hit the orc? Without rolling any dice, just tell me what happens. And then, a lot of people think, well, my characters are just going to hit everything. Well, that's fine. Let them. Let them succeed over and over and over again. That way, you will learn a few things. The first thing you'll learn is who your players are and what they like to do. Do they like to succeed? Do they like to succeed at everything? Or do they like to occasionally fail and tell a story about how they fail and fall down and scramble for their sword, but the enemy steps on the sword so they can't pick it up, so they got to sweep kick under the enemy and the enemy's tripped down and they grab the enemy's sword and then they kill the enemy, and it's an amazing story that started with failure. This will show you who the players are and what they're looking for in a game. It'll also show you who you are. It'll show you your comfort level when it comes to, deciding to run an RPG. What level of narration, what level of mechanics are you interested in? And how cool are you with saying, tell me if you succeed to the players? How cool are you with letting the players take control a little bit of your game, of your story? Second thing I want you to try to do is exactly that. Ask the players what they see. Okay, we open the door. We enter the room. Okay, what do you guys see in there? Wait, what? What do we see? You tell us. No. For now, I want the players to tell me what you see. You find a strange inscription carved into the wall. What does it say, players? Do that. That's fun. And that might not be for you, but you should do it. Because what's the worst that happens? You play for 2 hours and you find that you don't really enjoy the narrative side of the game. I mean, whoop-de-doo. You've had an experience. You've had some fun. Definitely have fun with it. And then you'll learn a lot about your group and yourself, and maybe part of what you might consider doing to be a better game master. So I think that's it. And I think that I love these podcasts. I love being able to have this just filter for me to speak into, and without having to worry about editing or topic or making sure I have something to say. Because I tend to realize that I, like you, always have something to say. I just need to start speaking in order to get to that point. And maybe the same is true with stories. You just got to start telling it, and then eventually it'll start telling itself.